Hello and welcome to the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. I'm your host, Joel Harrison. Now, just be yourself might be one of the most overused pieces of advice in leadership, but it might also be one of the most important. Trust is the currency every B2B leader and every B2B brand trades on. My guest today makes the case that it starts somewhere deceptively simple, being clear about who you are, what you stand for, and showing up in the same way in every room. In an era where AI can flatten almost anyone's message into the same polished sameness, a distinctive, genuinely held point of view may be one of the last real advantages left. But authenticity has its skeptics too, and we'll get into that. Karl van Bergh is Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Illumio, the breach containment company. He spent more than 25 years leading go-to-market teams at global technology companies, including CMO at Gigamon and DataStax. And he publishes regularly on authenticity and what it means to be a human at work. In this episode, you're going to learn about why a clear, distinctive point of view as a leader and a brand is your sharpest competitive advantage, how authenticity actually converts into trust and whether it survives the journey down through an organization, where the line sits between being more authentic and merely performing authentically, and why authenticity may matter more, not less, in the age of AI. So remember, if you find this conversation valuable, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating or review. It really helps marketers discover the show. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So, Karl, great to see you. Welcome. Thanks for joining me on today's podcast.
Thanks, Joel. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
That's great stuff. Tell us a bit more about your background. Do you train as a marketer? You've been a CMO in lots of different capacities?
Yeah, so not a career marketer. I have the last few roles, as you mentioned, being a marketer. But going back to my education, I did physics in Trinity. I then did a master's in computer science in Imperial in London, and then did humanities in Florence. So already my educational background is fairly varied. My career has followed suit, which is I started as a developer in Paris, a great place, by the way, to start your career early. Wine at lunch, 2 hours, lots of coffee breaks. It was fantastic. The rest of my career didn't follow, but it was a great start. And then I did product management. I did field marketing. I did M&A, corporate strategy, and I was a GM a few times. And so, but finally worked my way to marketing leadership. And then, as you mentioned, the last few companies, I've been a CMO and currently the CMO at Illumio, which is a late stage and recent backed startup focused on cybersecurity and specifically focused on breach containment, which, as we may discuss, is super relevant in the world of AI.
Okay, breach containment is one of those. It sounds like a lot to unpack in that. So well, I'm sure that will come out in the course of the conversation.
Yes.
So thank you for that great summary. It's great to hear. It sounds like you're quite a polymath in terms of your background, and I love it when people bring all that nous and knowledge from across different interests and specialisms into their marketing. Yeah. I think it just enriches it as a profession, as an individual, right? So.
Agreed.
Okay, so let's get into our questions then. So you've been writing and creating a lot of content around the topic of authenticity, centered on the idea that trust starts by being clear about who you are and what you stand for and showing up consistently. After more than 25 years, more than leading marketing teams, what prompted you to start writing this right now?
I think really it's been a sort of a personal journey as well. And it's kind of one of the things I wrote about, which was it took me a long time to be myself at work. And I think that's probably true for many of us, which is for whatever reason, we believe we have to try and be, the ideal, whatever manager, leader, or what people tell us, or some other, well-known figure that, has been successful, rather than discovering what it means to be yourself and find success in being yourself. And it takes courage. And I think that's part of the reason why, we struggle with it. And so really it's been a personal journey, and I've found success and, enjoyment in what I do, the more that I can truly be myself, in my work, the same as I am at home. And we'll talk about it, right? What that means. It's not a kind of a simplistic, just be whoever you are and, with disregard to norms or what's expected of you or roles. There are, of course, nuances to this, but I do believe we do our best work when we are truly ourselves.
Yeah, I can't help but echo that. It's very, very wise words. I mean, I don't want to diminish it, but there's that expression, be yourself, everyone else is taken, is very appropriate. But I think there is a certain level of kind of conforming to expected norms, which you kind of go through at an earlier age, and
Yeah.
confidence and maturity about knowing what those norms that are reasonable are, and what that notion about what your personal values are. So I think it's a very kind of candid and true perspective.
And I think, look, what I'm advocating for is, and I do genuinely believe this, I think everyone has their own unique genius. And we tend to, again, elevate certain individuals who have, achieved certain milestones or certain things in life or in the public life, and idealize these people. And I think that is, yes, for sure, many of these individuals have done great things, but I believe everyone has a unique role to play on this planet. And, and when it comes to work, I think everyone has unique genius. So you just have to find that. And the only way you can find that is to be yourself and to be confident in being yourself and trust, what comes from within.
Yeah, so it's a two-way street almost, until you recognize that, until you seek it, you're never going to achieve your potential. I like that point of view. Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of leaders, a lot of brands end up sounding the same, in the world we live in, but given all the sources of information and content, and we homogenize like content starts to do. What is it that makes a clear, distinctive point of view such a differentiator, and why do so few people actually commit to one?
As I said, in being yourself, it takes courage. And I think also in having a distinctive point of view, as a brand, as a company, takes courage because, a lot of times organizations will want to try and please everyone. And again, there's a lot of parallels between the individual and the organization, and you can't. And no matter how you try, and if you try, what ends up happening, either you produce something that is so anemic or without any character that it makes no mark. And people might look at it, I'll take it like an example of the ads that we run and produce. We choose them purposefully so that they will get a reaction. You'll either love it or you'll hate it. And I much rather that than something that like looks like everything else and just fades into the background. And so an example I did at a prior company, it was really to kind of wake the industry up, the cyber industry, because again in cyber, to the fact that we're kind of walking around exposed and not realizing it. And so the metaphor we used was the expression pants down, to be caught with your pants down. And so literally we had people walking around the office in this video with their pants down. They had boxer shorts. It was tastefully done, but it was definitely not conventional. And it had a huge, huge impact because some people then said, hey, we can't do that in our region because it wouldn't be culturally acceptable. And I said, sure. But it way outperformed benchmarks. And again, takes some courage. It took a little bit of work inside the company to get out the door because people were a little bit concerned, hey, is this going to send the wrong impression? But again, I'd much rather something like that than something that's generic and looks like everybody else.
Okay. The conversation about boldness and creativity, I think, is on one hand a well-trodden path, but at the same time, it's still a challenge. Still, companies who are willing to do it and to put themselves in the line like that is few and far between. Which is good news. It means those who do able to step up to the plate, to use a baseball analogy, are going to succeed. But I push it. That takes courage. I just wanted to understand something though. But there's the brand narrative and there's your personal narrative. I mean.
Yeah.
I guess you're clearly someone who's building your own kind of narrative in terms of you're stepping out, and having your own voice. To what extent do you need to align those things, make them compatible, or even be aware of that?
Yeah. So, look, obviously, I build my own personal brand and do my own more so now than I used to. And I have to be considerate of the fact that, of course, I'm an executive at this company, and so I got to be mindful of that. I would say whatever I do in the sort of private domain. That being said, obviously I've got a particular point of view, and it doesn't necessarily, incorporate what the company is doing or positioning, and so I would say there's consistency in the fact that in both cases I am trying to push this being authentic, so being true to who you are. I'm doing that for myself and for the company, that we have a point of view, that we are consistent internally in how we operate, and externally how we project to the market, how we interact with customers. And I think that authenticity, and I think we'll talk about trust, and obviously this is something that you care about, I think is it's very foundational to trust. Because
Okay.
if you are not authentic, people don't know who they're interacting with. They can't trust somebody that you don't know, that's not authentic.
And you segued beautifully my next question, by the way, though. So thank you for doing that. And there's the authenticity is a function of being candid, being honest, being human. Dare I say it? Is that right, or is it something else?
I think it's that again. It's the fact that you are consistent in different contexts, and you're consistent to, again, what's true, what you value, to who you are. And again, I'll say that for an organization, no matter what forum we operate in, whether it be internally and how we treat employees, externally with customers and partners and vendors, that we are consistent to our values. I think that's probably the hallmark of authenticity.
Okay. Now, authenticity is an interesting word, isn't it? And it's one of those words that we kick around a lot in marketing. I've got a good friend of mine who's runs a social media agency. She can't stand the word. I don't have a particular problem with it, but she really rails against it. And but is there an aspect of authenticity that can be, or a version of authenticity that's a bit performative, and where you're playing a game and you don't really mean it, and if that's the case, is that something you can spot quickly? Audiences can see through that because they're very, very savvy these days. Do you think you can tell when a leader or a brand has crossed that line from genuine authenticity to that kind of more performative state?
Yeah, look, I think anything that becomes performative, obviously, is, and maybe why your friend or your colleague reacts to it, clearly will leave a kind of a bad taste in the mouth. And I think by definition, if you are by the definition of the word, when I said being consistent in every context to your values and to your point of view, which is not easy. And where you see this, sort of to your question, how can you spot it? I think you will spot it when you're seeing that let's talk about companies, the company is not being consistent in different contexts. And I think the real test of it is when there's a crisis of any shape or form. When there's internal or an external crisis in the market, when people are under pressure, then you see their true colors. And if at that point you are not, again, being consistent to your values, that's when it really shows up.
And I guess the other aspect of authenticity is in terms of leadership as well. There's a kind of your outbound customer orientated authenticity, but also your inbound authenticity as a leader. Does that, when a leader is clear and consistent, again, I guess that you'd say that cascades down through the team and is something which is a really valuable leadership technique's the wrong word, attribute, something which pays dividends in that context.
Yeah, look, I think and so again, the journey I've been on with my team, and I've talked a lot about this since I've been in Illumio for about a year and a half, and talked about this when I started. And I would say we're California based, US based, and I would say in Europe, given I'm in Europe at the moment and originally from Europe, and obviously, as are you. I think probably have a little bit of a easier time speaking our mind. When it comes to West Coast Californians, they tend to be more diplomatic in how they you talk, and so I've had to sort of train in terms of, hey, if you've got something on your mind, you need to speak your truth. Now, there are different ways of doing it. You don't have to be, an a-hole about it. You can just speak your mind, and it's really important. And if you're familiar with Patrick Lencioni, who is the kind of the management guru, the five dysfunctions, he talks about the five dysfunctions. He talks about fear of conflict, or the inability to essentially speak your mind and to really address the problem, as one of the key challenges to building a high performance team. Because what happens in the absence of people, being authentic and really speaking what's on their mind and speaking to the problem, is that it builds often people get frustrated. You get some passive aggressive behavior building up. And, they're doing with the best of intentions, which is, hey, we want to keep a nice atmosphere where we don't have arguments or, vigorous discussion, but it backfires. It backfires because of what I said, frustration builds up, people become passive aggressive, and it leads to low performance. So I've been on this path, and the team is getting more used to now having these discussions and having open discussions about the challenges. And it's not about the people, it's about the problem and focusing on the problem and fixing the problem. So I've seen, to your question, I've seen real tangible business benefits in being authentic, because it allows us to get to the problems, to surface them quickly, to take them off the table, and to move forward.
That's a great answer. The word that is springing to front of my mind throughout your entire answer was around culture, because presumably you have to have a culture within that team that enables people to be authentic. So, I'll come back to that. Was it Drucko said, culture eats strategy for breakfast? You have that culture, and it enables all other kinds of good behaviors and good attributes and good responses. So, fantastic. Okay. Now, I was going to go back to something you said earlier on. You talked about you've been very clear about consistency being really important, and you said that often a situation is there's an issue when there's a crisis, right? Yeah. That's when the what hits the fan, so it's easy to be consistent when things are going well, but when things go badly, then that becomes a problem. Are there any other points where leaders kind of fall short in terms of consistency, or perhaps they take shortcuts, or they don't behave as consistently as they might do?
Look, I mean, we all have our bad days, right? So I think a part of this, learning to be yourself, learning to be authentic, all of this, and striving for, to be consistent, is also to be forgiving of yourself. And so when things go wrong, as they inevitably will, and we fall short, which inevitably will happen, I think it's also great. It builds a lot of trust. If as a leader or as an individual, you can admit you're wrong, admit your mistakes, especially as a leader in an organization. I think people appreciate it when the leader is vulnerable in that way and admits to, hey, I messed up, we're going to fix it. Or, collectively we messed up. And again, failures are opportunities for learning. And so I think for me, that's a big part of it. And I'm all about, and we talk about being a team of elite athletes, and that's kind of so it's continuous and constant improvement. So the consistency is more in the effort of improving rather than consistency of output, because as I said, we will at some point, miss the mark. But it's your ability to pick yourself up, learn from mistakes, and then do better. That's really what defines success for me.
Okay. I like that as a nuance as well, because if you're just being consistently doing the same thing forever, then they're not going to improve. The consistency of improvement. Yeah.
And you won't. I said, if you're not failing, you've probably heard this before. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, and we're not pushing hard enough. And really, that is very important to me, is like constantly trying to get to the next level.
Okay. So let's talk a bit about your market. You mentioned earlier on that you're in the cybersecurity space, which is a really dynamic space. Interesting. You were saying that you don't think there's perhaps much creativity deployed there as it might be, but let's park that one for a moment. Cybersecurity is a market, which I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is shaped by fear and risk and high stakes, right? That's inherently what you're trying to mitigate. So that's a fascinating, creative kind of tension you're trying to create there. Is there a tension between leading openly and authentically and operating in a market like that? Does authenticity get harder as those stakes rise?
I think it gets even more important. So again, going back to it is hard to know who to trust, and especially again, that's what cyber is all about. And right, cyber crime is all about duplicitous behavior, breaking trust. It goes against everything, right? And so everything that I'm talking about here, and so for an organization, it's really important the relationship with the vendor is to be able to trust them in this, because you are trusting your crown jewels with this vendor essentially by bringing in a cybersecurity vendor. So for me, it's super important. And again, trust, as I said earlier, you can only really have trust with an organization or a person that you know. Right, that you and you can only know someone when they are being themselves. I say you can build a sort of fake relationship. Ultimately, will come back to bite you if you're building with somebody that you don't really know, or you think you know, but are not true to who they say they are. So I think for me, this is foundational in cyber, like probably more than in any other domain right now. This concept of trust and authenticity is paramount to us being able to operate and to be successful as a vendor.
Okay, so that's fascinating. So I mean, it's always important to put a counter argument. So I'm going to offer just kind of be devil's advocate for a second here. So there's a book by a gentleman called Thomas Champoro Premuzi, and I'm really sure I've got that wrong, but that's how it reads to me, right? So I'm sure hopefully Thomas doesn't massacre Thomas's name too much. His book is Don't Be Yourself. That's the title of it. Yep. So obviously you can see where I'm going with this. Yep. This contends that authenticity is overrated. The most effective leaders adapt what a situation demands rather than staying rigidly true to themselves. What's your response to that?
Yeah. So I sort of pre-read your note on this one. So I familiarize myself with his work. We're actually not at the surface level. You say it was kind of being inconsistent, but what he says in that book is like, if you're yourself in the sense of, hey, I'm, I have no need to improve. I don't need to listen to feedback. I'm just going to be who I am, and people are going to have to deal with it. That's not being yourself. I mean, that might be at the surface level what you understand to be yourself, but it's not what I'm talking about. And what really, what he's saying is, hey, you should take feedback. There are certain expectations of a role, and of course you need to perform to those expectations. You can't just show up, in your pajamas because you're having a bad day, right? There are certain norms. So what I'm saying is, at a deeper level, being yourself is uncovering that unique genius and expressing that and being confident and courageous in putting that out into the world. What he's saying is, you've got to make an effort. You've got to try to always improve yourself, because you're never, done. And you certainly need to listen to other people and take feedback. And so in many ways, I think both things are complementary.
And obviously, it makes for a much better title of a book, saying something controversial like "Don't be yourself." So
yes, and it does, and it gets, because, like your colleague said, authenticity is maybe overused right now, and being yourself, we hear this a lot. Bring your whole self to work, I think, is one of the things he talks about. And if you misinterpret it, or you take it at a superficial level, you'll definitely not do the best work that you can do.
Okay. Now, we need to talk about AI because AI is quite important in B2B right now, in the world right now, certainly in marketing and certainly B2B. And what we're finding, I'm sure you've experienced this and you're seeing this as well, AI is flattening so much content into this kind of polished sameness. Does authenticity become more valuable or harder to hold on to in that context? And what does it look like as a competitive advantage for a leader or for a brand?
So it does. And I love that the topic of AI, because everyone obviously is grappling with it right now. And my view on this is I actually think AI will make us, if we take this challenge, because there's certainly a big opportunity with AI and huge, potential with AI. There's also a lot of challenges that come, right? With any technology, as we've seen with social media or anything, there's kind of the good and the bad. I think the challenge for us with AI is that it has the opportunity to make us better humans. And what I mean by that is I think the best, and I'll bring it back to business, I think the best businesses will become even more human or relation-centric. And this is where authenticity shines. What that means is to be a true human. And I write about being human at work is on a series of blogs and articles on LinkedIn. Being a human at work, I think that's going to become the premium quality. And when people want to know authentic, what's an authentic brand or an authentic person? It's about the person, the human, not the AI generated content coming out from that organization, from that individual. And at the same time, I think leveraging AI for what it's really great at, which is obviously high intelligence at scale and output at scale and automation at scale. These are all great things, but the truly great organizations will leverage AI for that. And they will also really invest in human relationships with the market, with their customers, and build unique experiences where the customer gets to experience the authenticity of the brand or the organization. And I think that will be the winning combination.
Yeah, it's not as if AI is inherently wrong and it fits into a broader picture and it only distills and makes those human experiences more valuable for everybody concerned.
Yeah, so it's like, think of it as automating away all the stuff that it's great at doing. And then you focus on building the best human experiences for your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really absolutely seeing that. And I think that's completely correct. That's exactly what we should be doing and thinking about. And I think that's a valuable thing. It's an example of how it can make marketing better because we can really focus where we can make a difference. So Karl, final question from me, because it's been really fantastic conversation with you today. For a B2B marketing leader, or indeed a marketer, aspiring leader, someone who wants to move up the corporate ladder, who wants to lead or perform more authentically and build more trusted result, but doesn't know where to start. What's one thing you tell them to start doing differently next week?
I would say for marketers, the big thing, because marketing is, and this is another topic I talk a lot about, marketing is still a very misunderstood function. I think it's in B2B, it's one of the most complex, diverse functions, which I love about it, right? It's really right brain, left brain. It's got every domain under the sun, really under the umbrella of marketing. And so you have to be good at a lot of different things. So goodness, what would I say? I think part of it is, if you can, and if the opportunity is to experience or to work in different domains. I know that's not always possible, but to the degree that's possible, like take a role in sales or in operations or, whatever. I think expanding, or at least learn about it. I'm like forever reading, listening to podcasts, because as a marketing leader, certainly I can speak to this in my experience, having a diverse background and knowing about other parts of the business helps me be a much better marketer and a much more credible executive on the executive team. And I think that we need more marketers with kind of a broader perspective on the business. They're not just domain experts in marketing. They need to understand business and business context in order to be able to also explain the role of marketing to the organization, because that's what I call the CMO tax. 30% of our time needs to be explaining, bringing the executive team and the board along the journey when it comes to marketing and the investment in marketing. And so I would say broaden your horizons is kind of the summary to be a better marketer.
That's very, very wise words. I think we all need to be, in that respect, humble, listening to other people and learning from the wisdom of others and then embodying that, and having your head down in the bunker and in the rabbit hole is not a way to do that. So I thoroughly agree. Karl, it's been fantastic talking to you today. I really enjoyed your perspective on this, and I think you've really clearly kind of distilled something which I think is very important to marketers, and you clearly put a lot of thought into this. So thank you for being my guest today. I appreciate it.
It was great to talk with you, Joel. Very much enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Well, that's all for us today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, remember, don't forget to like, to rate or subscribe so that we can get you signed up to listen to future episodes or watch future episodes, depending on where you consume this podcast from. It's really helpful to me, so knowing what people like and how I can keep growing the podcast and hopefully creating lots more content which resonates. But that's it for today. Thanks for listening, and hope to see you next time on the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. Thank you. Goodbye.